that you have all the resources ready, let's get started. Welcome to Module 2, which is titled Culture and Communication. Refer to page 2 in your workbook to write some notes and follow along. Let's start with a basic question. What is communication? Communication is sharing information or ideas and includes the successful conveying of those ideas. So how do you know if you're successful? How do you know if somebody got it? Before we can know if we're successful, we need to know a little bit more about communication in general.
I too wanted to come and introduce myself. I've met some of you informally and others not.
What makes up our communication? It can include words, language, writing, speaking, listening, body language.
My name's Chad Friesen. I'm the CEO of Friesen's. I have spent a lot of my career with this company, but I haven't done the same career for more than 5 years at any one time.
Gestures, eye contact, tone, and voice. How we write, our vocabulary, or words that we choose. We can also communicate in many ways through pictures, diagrams, signs, symbols, and more recently, emojis. Can you think of other ways that we communicate with each other? Just thinking about all the ways that we communicate helps us understand that communication is complicated. Communication is hard because we communicate from our own experience. We don't see things the same way that others do. We believe that how we see things is right. We're not always aware of our own perceptions, and we don't always have a shared understanding of what things mean. For example, not all symbols or emojis mean the same thing to everyone. To illustrate this, please pause this video and complete the worksheet on page 3 of your participant workbook. The directions are at the top of the page. When you're finished, you can restart the video. We often express ourselves in ways that are not exact descriptions of how we feel. Sometimes we do that through a form of language called idioms. Every language or culture group has their own idioms, and if we don't understand what they mean, these sayings can be very confusing. Did you know all of the ones on the worksheet? What other idioms do you know that might confuse others? Communication with newcomers is influenced by many things, and we have dedicated a large portion of the guide and toolkit to supporting an understanding of factors that influence communication. We have included short lists of common and workplace idioms in the guide and have additional resources available on the website that support developing positive communication skills. Here are a few more idioms, things we say that may not be clear to newcomers. Have you heard these before? What about your newcomer neighbor or coworker? Or maybe they have sayings from their home country that have similar meanings. One of the reasons that communication is difficult is because most aspects of communication are influenced by our culture. When you look at the cultural iceberg, you can see that only language and literature are above the waterline. Everything else about communication is below the waterline, which helps us understand that most of our communication is influenced or perhaps distorted by the cultural norms and understandings that we have. Forms of communication such as eye contact, gestures, and facial expressions are not universal, and that means that they don't always mean the same thing to everyone. I grew up learning that eye contact means that you're paying attention and showing respect. There are some cultures where maintaining eye contact with someone who is an elder or a manager in the workplace is considered rude and inappropriate. Or how about showing affection to others through greetings and friendship? Is it different in public or in private? All of these things are part of how we communicate, and these different expectations influence how we understand others' communication as well. If you're following along in your workbook, you can make some notes of your own on page 4, underneath the cultural iceberg image. Dr. Albert Mehrabian introduced the theory of personal communication in the late 1960s, and it is still widely used to help us understand the relative impact of words, tone, and body language in conveying attitudes and feelings. When our words and what we see, our body language or gestures, facial expressions, and hear, our tone, are different, we tend to believe what we're seeing over what we're hearing.
So if you look at page number 2, could you please open this?
In the workplace, this can lead to misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and is sometimes at the root of cases of bullying and harassment in the workplace. Lack of understanding about how someone communicates can cause us to judge and discriminate against others without considering their perspective based on their first culture and what they have learned or been taught. Let's do a simple activity to illustrate this. Imagine you have a partner with you. Start playing a game of 20 questions. One person will pick an object in the room and the other will try to guess the object by asking questions that must only be responded to with a yes or no answer. When you answer the questions, you must move your head in the opposite direction of your response. So if the answer is yes, we would normally go like this. And so I would like you to do yes. If your answer is no, we would normally go like this, and I want you to do no. When you try it for a little while, you'll realize how hard it is to be accurate, and it can confuse both partners in the conversation. Even though the words are the accurate response, the nonverbal gestures, the nonverbal cues, nodding or shaking your head, can cause a significant amount of confusion. Which message do we listen to? In Canada, we nod for yes, and we shake our head for no. But not every culture is the same. Culture has a profound impact on how we communicate. Let's explore some connected ideas around communication styles and context which are both rooted in our cultural experience. We have learned behaviors that influence how we communicate. One influencing factor is whether communication is direct or indirect. In indirect communication, the meaning is conveyed through words, but also through the context and the nonverbal behaviors. Pauses, silence, tone of voice. Ideas are inferred rather than open or explicit. The listener is expected to understand. In direct communication, the speaker is responsible for clear communication. In a direct speaking background, you move from starting with the main point and move directly to the final point in a straight line. In an indirect speaking style, you start with the context, you tell a story, and you move in a circular pattern before you finally get to the point. You explain the situation, you tell your story, you share your experience, and slowly the speaker gets to the point, but even then, it may not be obvious. And the listener is supposed to understand the point through the conversation, story, or experience. Another difference in communication is called communication context. In this way of speaking, there are differences in how we approach conversations. In a low context environment, people say what they mean and mean what they say. They begin with the main point, they are clear, specific, precise, they tell things in order, and they're very direct in how they handle problems. In a high context environment, people need to read between the lines. They begin with the details and work toward that main point. They hint or imply, they might use symbols or metaphors to explain what they mean. They handle problems, conflict, and criticism indirectly. In both cases, they might have difficulty speaking with someone from a different context because they won't understand exactly what they mean. It's important to note that when looking at context, the arrow showing the difference between low and high context shows general information and may not be accurate for all individuals within a country. Note that English Canadians tend to be a little more direct than French Canadians. In the Pembina Valley, we highly value time and deadlines, and that's part of how we communicate. If your experience of seasons, deadlines, and time is different than ours, that could also cause confusion or misunderstandings. We identify this as the difference between on-time cultures like ours and sometime cultures, which are experienced in different places around the world.
Good morning.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm good, thank you.
In an on-time culture, we are focused on showing up on time, and we prioritize deadlines and timelines, sometimes
How are you today?
even over people or other tasks. The focus is on efficiency and speed. In a sometime culture, people tend to be more focused on relationships than time.
Rainy. It was crazy.
Tasks are secondary because tomorrow is soon enough to fit it in if it doesn't get done today. And as long as the goal is met and relationships are honored, then the deadlines are flexible.
Not that hard.
Like in the office.
I'm working like administrative but not here.
In an on-time culture, meetings are important, and showing up late is rude and generally unacceptable. In a sometime culture, meetings are important but may not be attended on time if there was a conversation that was not previously completed at the time of the meeting. The relationship and the conversation that are happening are more important, and it is disrespectful to leave that conversation even if something else has been planned until a natural conclusion has been reached. We do not often recognize what our culture does or expects until we learn more from newcomers about how they view our culture. A newcomer from Jordan shared this story about the impact of how we communicate around time and deadlines in Canada.
When we arrived here, I did not understand why Canadians always had to check their schedules. But now, with my job, busy kids, appointments, and my husband working out of town, I understand.
In your workbook, you'll find this checklist for assessing your own communication. It is also on page 35 in the guide and toolkit, which has more information and ideas to consider to support intercultural communication development. Now that we know a little bit more about some of the struggles that we have in communicating effectively, we can refer back to the reflective learning cycle we introduced in Module 1. Before we make a judgment or evaluation on what we're seeing or hearing, we are encouraged to spend more time in observing and interpreting, watching and understanding. The reason for this is we tend to interpret and evaluate based on our norms. If we want to get to know someone, really get to know someone, and understand what they're doing or why they're doing it, we need to interpret based on their first culture and their experience. By observing and learning, we will be more accurate in our interpretation and fair in our evaluation. We will also be able to help or advise and counsel someone as they adjust to local cultural norms. A key is to stop interpretation and evaluation and spend a little bit more time in observation. Quick judgments are based on our own cultural norms and may cause errors when we're working with people from other cultures. When we see a lack of success in the workplace, we need to go back to this reflective learning cycle and ask ourselves if something's up. Am I making decisions based on the way that I see things without considering the intercultural dimension of communication? Am I discriminating because of my own default communication norms? Is there an intercultural communication challenge that I haven't recognized? How can I be more just in my understanding of what is happening? If we really want everyone to feel like they belong, like this is home, then what should we do differently when communicating? How has this video helped you gain knowledge about culture and communication? Did it increase your awareness? Did you learn something that you didn't know before about culture and communication? Did it increase your understanding? Do you think about something differently than maybe you did before the workshop? And what about skills and abilities? Do you have some ideas or tips that you can use when working or living alongside newcomers? Please visit our website or use the QR code in your participant workbook to complete a brief survey to help us improve these resources. Thank you for spending this time with me and for your interest and effort in helping build welcoming and inclusive communities in the Pembina Valley.